Okay, welcome to review session 8. We're going to be starting content area 4. And remember that content area 4 is the last one we're going to review together. It is the largest content area, and so most likely you're going to have a work on your shortened AP exam for this 2020 year that comes from content area 4, right? For your FRQ. So if you'll remember the sample FRQs that we had that I'd shared with you, the breakdown for, and one was the painted elk hide, which was from Indigenous Americas, but then I asked you to compare that to one of two different works from the from content area 4. It was Migration of the Negro by Jacob Lawrence, or Diego Rivera's Dream of a Sunday Afternoon at Alameda Park. So content area 4 is going to play into your exam. So I just want to make sure that you are good with 4. So let's get started. Look in here. So these are kind of the things that College Board, remember, wants you guys to be sure that you're aware of. We've gone over these. You should have them in your notes. Some of the ideas we'll be looking at. Generally, think about content area 4 as the age of isms, meaning we're going to see a lot of art movements really quickly happening at the same time, overlapping. It's no longer like antiquity where you'd have the same thing for years and years and years. So it's a rapid change, lots and lots of movement stylistically. So our first piece is a little bit of an outlier because this is a work that is from Mexico, but yet it's very heavily European flavored. So this is the portrait of Juana. Remember that Senora Juana Inez de la Cruz was the nun who'd become an esteemed academic. And then whenever she got a little too prominent, according to the men at this time, and so they ended up trying to squash her voice. They made her write that she was the worst in the world, remember, and she had to sign it in her own blood. She had to give up her library, and she had to take care of people who were really sick, and then she ended up getting sick and dying. So this is a posthumous portrait, posthumous meaning made after her death. It's in this style that's very similar to works we've seen of monks, male religious figures. A lot of symbolism here to align with women's roles in Catholicism, Christianity. All right, so now we're jumping into Rococo. Think about Rococo as being a more is more type style. Some people call this late Baroque because it's taking that drama from the Baroque and it's making it artificial. It's making it purely decorative. It strips away the propagandistic parts of Baroque and just makes it all about extravagance, over the top, carefree, indifference, eroticism. We see swirls, we see pastoral scenes. Fragonard was influenced by Rubens. Remember that Rubens did, right there on the left, which I said would be a good piece to know, Rubens did the Marie de Medici series. So we're going to know that color is going to be important. So this is the Swing by Fragonard. I'm sure you guys remember us talking about this. Some of the symbolism, this kind of pink poof inside of this green, lush, erotic, symbolic landscape around her. The guy who's in the dark versus the guy in the know. We talked about the dynamic form here, how much movement is happening, and that makes sense because it's a swing. So this is going to be time leading up to the revolution. All right, so Rococo, real quick, one art style there, or one art piece there. So now we're going to move into the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is going to, I like how this sums it up, focus on reason over superstition. So more of an emphasis on things that are scientifically provable, less of an interest on folk stories and the church and mysticism. So remember, art history and society and the arts, everything is always this kind of pendulum swing back and forth and back and forth. And so we've already had time of, I would say in the medieval, where they're really superstitious, right? Think of all the relics, think of all the stories, and now it's time to swing back to reason, hard facts. So this is a British work of the Enlightenment. Very typical. So the light in this work is showing their, coming to knowledge. And then still kind of part of the Enlightenment, but it has that kind of strange term of natural, can even fall under some of the prominence of Rococo. But this is Self-Portrait by Elizabeth Louise Vigée-Lebrun. This work has always kind of been an outlier to me. It doesn't quite fit in. But I think the prominence here is about a woman who has made her name as an artist. And that's important. That's a change in this male-dominated society of French academic painters. So we know that Vigée-Lebrun was the favored painter of Marie Antoinette. She was one of the few women who was part of the French Royal Academy, and then that changes after the Revolution. Force and grace is how she depicted her subjects. All right, so we're coming off of the frou-frou, carefree extravagance of Rococo, right? So now it's time to head towards something that is going to be more about reason and order. So it's time for Neoclassical, a revisit of those classical ideals that made Greece and Rome so fondly remembered. So this is David. David is using line and color to create work that is very mathematically perfect. We can see these 3 barrel arches with 3 kind of figures or figure groups. Remember that the Horatii are pledging their allegiance to their sword and their city, and they are going to go fight 3 men from, I think it's Alba, and whoever wins, right? And so the women versus the men depicted very differently in terms of gender roles here. We know this, it's obviously like a traditional kind of myth story, but you would know that it wasn't actually a Roman work because we don't have paintings, right, from Rome. And so look at media to help you there. So yes, it's a painting about Rome, but it's made in France in the 1780s. So this is leading right up to the revolution. All right. Oh, and something else to mention about this. It was always considered, it's a really, really large painting, and it was always considered a little bit inflammatory. And so for a while, this was owned by the king, and then it goes back to the artist. It's kept in his aunt's attic for a while. And so it's had kind of a story. So this has always been a politically charged work. All right, so in America, we're still doing we're doing neoclassical because Thomas Jefferson went to France, was a diplomat to France, and was very influenced by the aesthetics there. And so he rebuilt his home, Monticello, in Virginia, to look similar to how the French are building during this point in time. Now, Americans, yes, they are doing the neoclassical, but they're calling it something different because, America. So it's sometimes referred to as federalism. Just know it means neoclassical. You can say neoclassical, that's fine. So he's using, he had them use local materials. That's why the brick is there. And then the structure itself is very, very classical. So pediment, right? That triangular form is the pediment. It has a cylinder in the middle with a dome and an oculus, has the balustrades. Okay, these are Doric order, right? So the frieze is Doric, the columns are Doric, and very symmetrical. It aligns with the cardinal directions. So this is a very reasonable, orderly structure. Jefferson believed that art and architecture could be used as a tool to bring about the ideals and the ideas of enlightenment in the New World, okay, in America, post or leading up to and then post-revolution. He designed structures at the University of Virginia, the State House. Very reasonable, orderly, symmetrical. All right, so we looked at this artist, Udon. Udon here is the sculptor of the Enlightenment, right? He's the guy that if at this point in time, if you want to get a sculpture made, he's going to be just the one to do it. Especially the quote founding fathers, anybody who is a proponent of Enlightenment ideals in either Europe or Americas, he's your guy. So remember that Thomas Jefferson arranged this for George Washington's statue to be made by Udon, and the story of how Udon came over actually and went to Mount Vernon and met with him and measured him. And so this is a true likeness. It's the same size, circumference, every detail is Washington. All the symbolism involved there. I don't think it'll be, it's already been on the AP exam recently, so I don't think it'll be on there. Okay, so we've been in the reasonable neoclassical, right? Enlightenment, things that are orderly, that value reason. Now it's time to swing to something a little bit more chaotic, something more dramatic, something more emotional. Romanticism, right? Romanticism, 1800 to 1850. Romanticism is a reaction against the Enlightenment, right? So it's reacting against what happened before. The subjective, the irrational, the imaginative, the spontaneous, emotional, those are typical of Romanticism. And There's Nothing to Be Done is a series, it's part of a series called The Disasters of War. There's 82 or 84 of them. And so this is plate number 15. This was made by Goya. And Goya, remember, is using a Christ-like form, an alter Christus, to heroize, turn into a hero, our martyr here, who is one of the Spanish, part of the Spanish resurgence, who is holding these uprisings against the French, who are moving throughout Spain and killing people, forcing them to obey or killing them. And so we have this violent scene, but it's made very, very stark because of the black and white. So remember, he made these etchings, and then they weren't actually released until 30 years after his death. That's how afraid they were, or he was, of his true feelings getting out. Because remember, Goya also had to work for the French, even after they invaded Spain. There's some of the context. Technique, again, this is a great use of line. You could talk about value, okay, etching, and then it has dry point, which is another type of printmaking. They get more violent as they go on. All right, so we're kind of going to enter into that debate at this point. Still going to be working under that umbrella of Romanticism, but we have two artists who are really going to start competing with this idea of what is going to be more important, color versus line. So at the beginning of the century, right, we looked at David. He had a brilliant use of color, right? The red, this was Oath of the Horatii, right? The red of their togas. But if you were going to say what's more dominant, you would say line. Definitely. But by the end of the century, color is going to start to be more important, right? We're going to end the century with Impressionism, which has very little line and a lot of color. And so in between, you have this kind of conflict between Ong, which is line, and Delacroix, which is color. And I know you remember that we talked about these. Making sure you can tell the difference between color emphasis and line emphasis. So Delacroix on the left, Ong's on the right. So we looked at Le Grand Odalisque. This is Ong's kind of disproportionate, very disproportionate fantasy of what a French man might have as a fantasy of a harem girl who would be part of a group of concubines in West Asia. And so this is a fantasy piece. The emphasis is on line. It's very horizontal. She's elongated across that composition. This is a good bridge piece. Neoclassical meets Romanticism. And then his opponent is Delacroix, who is emphasizing color, right? Liberty leading the people. This is not about the major French Revolution. That's already happened in 1790. This is about the smaller Revolution of July, the 1830. And so we can see, yes, of course, there's some line, but color dominates. Both, well, more Delacroix than Ong, but both of them had traveled and been influenced by work from other cultures. So we would definitely say that Delacroix is influenced by Rubens. Remember, Peter Paul Rubens did our Marie de Medici cycle. And we would say that Ong is more influenced by David, Oath of the Horatii. Oxbow. This is American Romanticism called the Hudson River School. Thomas Cole here is painting this scene of manifest destiny, right? This idea of the sublime versus the pastoral. Sublime being where nature rules on the left, the pastoral being where mankind has established some sort of their idea of order on the right. This was Romanticism in America. Romanticism in England, our example is Slave Ship. We talked a lot about this work, so I hope you remember it. This is about the cruelty of the slave trade, that Middle Passage. It's about the cruelty of humans with slavery, of course, but also with greed and the fact that the men were thrown over for insurance purposes. All right, this is a work I think you guys did on your own. It is a recognizable structure, pretty famous. I mean, the Houses of Parliament, Palace of Westminster, and then of course Big Ben is part of this. The architects won this grant from a contest. And the contest was you could submit, architects could submit ideas for the new Parliament building because the old Parliament had burnt. And so Pugin and Barry won. This is Gothic Revival, which is very typical of what the British were doing at this point in time. A good way to think about it is it's romanticizing the medieval past. So it has a more modern, orderly layout, but the decoration, right, the exterior, the decorative qualities are much more cluttered, more typical of the medieval, of the muddledness of Gothic. It's very different stylistically than like the U.S. Congress building, right? And the state capitals and the country capital, right? I mean, we have very classical, whereas this feels church-like, and it's because it's looking to the medieval. And then Turner liked to paint the burning. All right, we're gonna stop there for this one, and I'll pick up review session 9 is going to do realism, photography, and impressionism. Oh.